You're watching The Film Fix. I'm Jonathan W. Hickman, and Jeff Marker and I just took in a double feature of sorts. I went to Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and Jeff Marker took in Repo Men. I actually skated in the last, I guess, 40 minutes of Repo Men, so I have a pretty good idea of what the movie's about. But before we get into the two movies that came out, or they're coming out this week that we just saw, let's talk a little bit about Green Zone. Jeff, the movie didn't do quite as well as what either one of us, I thought it would do.
Well, you have to keep in mind we're less than a week out from the release of Green Zone, so most of its business probably was based on how the trailer drew people in. And personally, I think one line in the trailer blew it for that movie when they stressed the fact that this is all about WMDs.
What do you think you're doing here, Miller? You're off reservation for a reason. What is it?
I came here to find weapons and save lives.
People think back to 6 or 7 years ago when that was all the talk and it was very divisive. And so that's one thing. People don't like to, generally speaking, mass audiences don't like to come in and be challenged politically, but also it seems a little bit outmoded to me.
I wrote this week in my blog that the only film from the Iraq War genre to translate that war to the screen that made any money was Brothers last year, and it made about $30 million, basically on the weight of its cast. And I think that movie, unfortunately, wasn't nearly as good as The Hurt Locker. That only made $12 million.
Well, Jonathan, you covered Diary of a Wimpy Kid tonight, and I was able to sneak in for about the first 20 minutes, and I found it very charming. It sort of drew me in, and I thought they really captured middle school, but I was sort of wondering, was there much of a story here?
Diary of a Wimpy Kid is based on the best-selling series of books by Jeff Kinney. It's about a little boy who is experiencing his first year of middle school, and it's all about his trials and tribulations. The books are really interesting because they're very visual. They're kind of like a graphic novel of sorts, but they use stick figure animation. And the movie uses stick figure animation to kind of push the narrative along. So it's really a good wink to the novel. And I think probably these series of books, because of the movie, will only get more popular. And this is, of course, a very charming movie, as you said. But it actually gets better as the film moves on. So you missed probably the best part of it. It reminded me a little bit early of Malcolm in the Middle. I kind of felt like this was a television series and less a feature film. But by the end of the film, I felt that their adaptation of Jeff Kinney's line of books that has charmed my fiance's 8-year-old is really a good film, and I think it has an audience. I think that the young boy audience, obviously you saw the Alice in Wonderland captured a little bit of both the boys and the girls, but certainly skewed girl. I think that audience is waiting to be tapped, and this film certainly can do that. They gave us the poster of the Diary of a Wimpy Kid. They also gave us the infamous cheese. And this is kind of interesting because the movie has a significance with the cheese. Don't touch the cheese.
Stop! Good God, man! You almost got the cheese touch. The what? The cheese touch. One day, a kid named Darren Walsh made the biggest mistake of his life. Darren touched the cheese! Darren had the cheese touch. It was worse than nuclear cooties. The only way to get rid of the cheese touch was by passing it on to someone else.
We should go get one for you too. Yeah, I love the color.
And so began the cheese touch frenzy. Friend turning on friend. It was madness. Until a German exchange student named Dieter Müller took it away that fateful day.
Dieter has a cheese touch.
Der Cheese Touch? Wie bitte? Ich verstehe nicht. Warum rennt ihr? Was soll das heißen, der Cheese Touch? He moved back to Düsseldorf and took the Cheese Touch with him. And so the cheese sits, patiently waiting for its next victim. Wow. This is a terrible place.
It's neat to see Steve Zahn in the role. I interviewed him some time back for his work in Rescue Dawn. That's the Werner Herzog film, and he's so good. He plays the father, and he has that heartwarming moment with his son. And I think anytime we get to see Zahn work, it's good, and it's good when it's in a good movie. He was in The Perfect Getaway last year, and I don't think anybody saw that movie. So tell us, Jeff, you saw Repo Men. Now, I saw a little bit bit about this, little bit of this movie, and it's pretty gruesome. I said it was kind of a cross between Blade Runner and Logan's Run in a way.
Those are good comparisons for Repo Man, actually. It reminded me very much of the 70s exploitive science fiction, which is good and bad. It's a very interesting movie, and for about the first 30 minutes, I thought that, I meant interesting in a good way. They set this world up. It's a very dark and gritty world. It's reminiscent of Blade Runner in its look, but it's a world in which designer organs have become very prevalent. And there's one company called the Union that sells these organs, and they charge very high credit rates. And so when the people can't pay those credit rates, they send the Repo Man to kill the people usually and rip the organs back out and repossess them the same way that you take a car or a house back.
We can offer monthly installments at an APR of 19.6%, standard for a generic pancreatic unit.
Frank Mercer, union manager. I understand you have concerns. Affordability. It's only natural. First of all, let me just reassure you that our credit department will find a plan that fits your lifestyle. And should you fall behind, there is a 3-month grace period. Not until after the 6th day of the 4th month of non-payment will we retrieve the property at our own expense, of course, utilizing our skilled and licensed technicians. Now, I'm not sure what you heard on the 6 o'clock news, but this almost never happens. I gotta tell you, you owe it to your family. You owe it to yourself.
And so the setup is actually very interesting. So think about the fact that in our current economic climate, you've got a movie about a corporation that lends something in very high credit rates, and when you can't pay, they literally rip out body parts, which is how a lot of us feel right now. That's all very promising. But by the end, this is just blood and gore, and it became really hard to take. There's no point to all this blood splattering on walls, and they find hundreds of ways to kill people, and it just all became a bit much.
How's your pancreas holding up? I sent the money in this morning.
We're always gonna be Repo.
From the IRS?
Nah,
They won't give me a new art?
no, no, your credit history.
But I do have to say, it had one of the more outrageous scenes I've seen in a movie in several years, maybe even a decade, and I won't give anything away, but it's interesting in one of those ways that you wish you could look away, but you just can't.
Often these movies, it's the setup that's the best thing. So tell me a little bit about what you thought overall on the credibility question.
There's a certain point, there's a very specific point in this movie where the audience turned on it. It had the audience, and then they sort of rebelled because they did not like the direction it went. And so, no, it definitely falls apart. They don't make good on that promising setup. And by the end, it's actually rather silly.
Repo Man stars Forrest Whitaker, this new, trim, action, ready-for-action Forrest Whitaker. Talk to us a little bit about Forrest Whitaker in this role. He's sort of a quasi-villain, I guess, in this movie. And then Jude Law. Is he a good hero? He's not a stranger to science fiction. We saw him in the Kubrick come Spielberg adaptation, AI, with that unknown guy that we don't see anymore, Haley Joel Osment. So Jude Law is not a stranger to science fiction, but in the lead as a hero, how is he?
Jude Law's performance sort of mirrors the trajectory of the whole film, actually. Up to a certain point, I think he's a very strong hero. But then there's a climactic scene where he needs to fight 30 or so guys at one time, and I just don't know if we buy Jude Law doing that. One of the reasons you do buy into his character is he has a very interesting relationship with the Forrest Whitaker character. And Forrest Whitaker is no stranger to this kind of movie. Remember the Jim Jarmusch movie, Ghost Dog? You know, he does something like this, The Way of the Samurai, and he gets to do some action sequences in that movie. And so he's done a little bit of this before, and he holds up just fine in the movie.
Boy, Jeff, wouldn't it have been great if Jim Jarmusch had taken on Repo Man? Wouldn't that have been something? And I guess it bears repeating, I don't think we said it earlier, but Alex Cox's sequel to Repo Man, the film from the 80s, is set to be released eventually. It's called Repo Chick. So I'm sure audiences will be sufficiently confused. Well, this is Jonathan Hickman and Jeff Marker, and you're watching The Film Fix.